Check out this clip by Jordan Peterson from his Australia tour. This one is really unique, and Philosophy Insights did some special editing, so enjoy.
And so you need that instinct for meaning too. So, and we should get this real straight. Why do you need it? Well, you need it because life is really, really difficult, right? I mean, people have a rough time of it. There's plenty of suffering in life, and everyone is going to encounter it, right? You learn this as a clinical psychologist, and you know this generally, unless you're an extraordinarily fortunate person. You don't have to talk to someone for very long and really talk to them and get beneath the surface until you find, there's a tragedy or two or three or 10 lurking not very far beneath the surface. Someone in the family is very ill. There's a childhood history of extreme pathology, alcoholism somewhere in the family, maybe a touch of insanity. Someone has cancer. An older relative is dying. There's financial trouble. There's economic trouble. There's marital trouble. It's like life is trouble. And now, that doesn't mean it's all trouble, but man, it's trouble. And sometimes it's a lot of trouble. And sometimes it's so much trouble that you can barely stand it. And you see that because people get depressed and they commit suicide. And the reason they do that is because they think not being is better than being. And that's quite the decision, So, and it's not that uncommon among people who are depressed. And so it's a very important thing to consider. And it isn't just a matter of depression and suicide. That's bad enough. But, if you're unhappy because your suffering has pushed you past the point of your ability to cope, then there's all sorts of other things that can happen to you that aren't directed towards you. You can become cynical, and you can become bitter, and you can become cruel, and you can become narcissistic and deceitful and arrogant, and it's like everything's for you. And then you're out for revenge. That's a nice one. I don't know against who, but maybe everyone. Maybe even including you, because you're not happy about the role you've played in generating your own misery. I mean, there's a lot of darkness underneath the suffering. And so, and that's an ever-present existential danger for human beings, We're aware of the future. We're aware of our fragility. We're aware of our mortality. It's something that makes us truly unique, truly conscious in a way that no other creature is, and capable of things that no other creature can do, but also bearing an unbelievably heavy existential load. We're the only creatures that have to always contend with the fact that we're finite and that everyone we know is in the same position, that allied with the suffering. And so that's there all the time. And even in the brightest moments, in some sense, in Renaissance paintings, in still lifes, they used to put a memento mori often in the still life, like a skull somewhere in the corner, or sometimes in a very strange perspective, so that you could only see the skull if you were standing like right beside the painting instead of dead on. But the idea was to always remember, that everything that exists is tainted or touched with the taint of mortality. And that's rough, but there's some useful things in it. It keeps you awake, and it keeps you focused if you're careful. But it also does indicate to you, if you think about it, the necessity of having a meaning in your life. Because if it's true intrinsically that life has this unbearable element of suffering, which seems to be completely what would you say, indisputable as far as I'm concerned. And it's worse than that too, because it's not just suffering, it's suffering contaminated with malevolence, right? It's bad enough to have something bad happen to you, and it's likely that that'll happen. But it's even worse for you to do it to yourself and to know that you did it. That's rough. And it's also extraordinarily rough to be betrayed by someone else, or tyrannized by your own culture. And that's not just suffering. That's like unnecessary and pointless suffering that's been directed at you by something that wants that to happen. And so both of those are very, very powerful, let's say, archetypal forces, suffering and malevolence, and we have to deal with them at every level of reality. And you need something to push back against that. It's not optional, if that's the default position, and I think it's the default position. Like, a meaningless life isn't meaningless. It's suffering and malevolence. That's not good. And And if that's acted out, that's the other thing. If that's acted out, and I've read the accounts and the actions of people who've taken a very vicious turn into the darkest parts of the underworld, consequence of their resentment and their malevolence, and then their desire to make everything in the world suffer for the outrage of its existence, man. I mean, that's how we turn things into hell. If you want to know why totalitarian states take the brutal twists they take and why people are motivated to do the absolutely terrible things that they do, well, that's why, is that the suffering and the malevolence that's intrinsic to life overwhelms them, and they turn in a very bad direction, and then they make everything that's already bad way worse, and we're very, very inventive at such things. And so that's not good, unless that's the path you want. That's a bad idea. You need an alternative, and that's meaning. And then rule 10, well, that's be precise in your speech. And so I'm going to weave those together and see what we can come up with as something like a general theory of meaning. That's really what I've been working on, I would say, for 35 years, something like a general theory of meaning. And so I'm going to see if I can deliver the whole damn thing in 35 minutes, which I've never really been able to manage, but I've had a lot of practice, so maybe this is the night. Okay, so the first thing I want to tell you about is a little bit about how you perceive things, because it's very important to know how you perceive things. And you don't perceive very much, by the way, because, well, there's a lot of the world, way more than you can possibly imagine, and there's not that much of you. And so a lot of information is coming in through a very narrow channel. And it isn't easy, given the fact that all that information exists, it isn't easy to figure out how to narrow that channel so that the information you get is the information that you need. It's information you need that also gives you a grip on the world, right? It has to be practically useful, true and practically useful, something like that. It's a very, 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 very difficult problem to solve. And a lot of it you don't even really solve, because you can't. It's too complicated. You solve it by doing what you're doing right now, for example. So here you are in this unbelievably beautiful building, and I read today a little bit about it, and today it would cost about $1 billion to build this building. And so you're sitting here, and you're all sitting here peacefully, and you're all pointing in the same direction, right? And we're all basically doing the same thing, and we're doing it peacefully, and we can all focus on the same thing, and we had to invest $1 billion for that to be able to happen. And so think about that, is that part of the way your society solved the problem of the complexity of the world for you was by investing $1 billion in what, how long did it take to construct this place? 15 years, something like that. Maybe it was longer. So that you could sit here in relative comfort and peace and tranquility and concentrate on something that's very focused, maybe something of beauty, something of artistic merit, something of intellectual merit, and that the rest of the world wasn't there, so you didn't have to worry about it. And that's not all. It's not just that you're here in this building and the chairs aren't falling apart and the floor is reliable and the electrical lights work and the sound quality is good and like all the technology is working, and there's people beetling away in the background like mad constantly everywhere, making sure that those impossible things keep happening so that you don't have to be distracted. But then you're also sitting with people who are roughly like you, roughly like you enough so that when they come into a venue like this, they know enough to sit down in the seats and face forward, and not turn around and look at the person behind them, which would make them very nervous, right? Which would be an indication that that person isn't playing the same game as everyone else, and so God only knows what they're up to, because you just wouldn't want that, right? You wouldn't want the guy in front of you turning around and just looking at you for the next 90 minutes. And, well, it's worth thinking about why. Like, well, what are you thinking about? You're going to be sitting there looking like this, your eyes are going to be darting around, and maybe you're going to be nudging someone and, pointing at this person because maybe they have some idea of what this person is up to, because you don't. And the problem is, if you don't know what that person is up to, then they could be up to anything. And anything is a lot of things to be up to. And you don't want people to be up to anything. You want them to be up to the one or two things they're supposed to be up to while they're with you in this narrow place that you occupy, right? And that's sort of the hallmark of a civilized and socialized person, is when we interact under 90% of conditions, 99% of conditions, you show me your persona. It's just a very narrow slice of yourself, and I show you mine at the bank, say, or at the grocery store, when we pass each other casually in the street. We nod and say hi, and you nod and say hi, or we just walk by peacefully, and like we're seething with complexity, and we don't let any of that out. And the reason for that is we don't want anybody else to let any of it out either. Right? So we keep ourselves simplified, and we build our architecture for that. And so, you come into a building like this, and the building tells you what to do. The chairs are all aligned. The chairs say, sit on me, right? The chairs are all facing the same way in kind of a semicircle, and they say, face the stage. And there's a stage. And so you come in here, and all the perceptual problems are solved. And so there's all this technology, and there's all this expense, and then there's the shared culture that enables you to know that this is something like a theatrical experience. And so what you do at a theatrical experience is come together as a group and remain silent but attentive, participating in that manner, and watch and listen to the main performance. And you all know that. It's part of the shared culture. And so that shared culture is also enabling you to perceive what you're perceiving right now as a protective mechanism. And that's part of a broader shared sense of civilization, and it's dependent on a shared government. And then there's other forms of protection, I mean, well, the sun isn't shining on us too brutally because we have a roof, and we're not in danger of warfare because you have borders, and you have an armed forces, and you have policemen, and it's like, Christ, there's just things going on around you like mad to ensure that you can sit here so peacefully and so much as if the world isn't a complex place for an hour and a half and do something this focused. And so that's partly how you solve the perceptual problem.